A century before algorithms sorted feeds and models issued recommendations, a different problem unsettled modern thought. What if the reasons for our actions are not fully available to us? What if a symptom, a dream, or an awkward slip of the tongue carries a meaning that its speaker cannot immediately see? In Vienna at the turn of the 20th century, Sigmund Freud made that question central to a new and controversial practice: psychoanalysis. He did not discover a machine hidden in the skull. He proposed a way of interpreting conflict, memory, desire, and meaning when their causes seemed partly concealed. Freud's importance does not lie in having supplied a blueprint for artificial intelligence. His importance lies in changing how many people imagined the self. Conscious deliberation was no longer the whole story. Dreams, symptoms, errors, fantasies, and compulsions could be treated as clues, not random noise, but events calling for interpretation. This was a daring claim. It made inner life appear less transparent than the rational self of philosophy had often supposed. But it was also a claim that would remain disputed, scientifically, therapeutically, and morally. To understand Freud clearly, we must begin with a distinction that popular retellings often blur. His earlier topographical model described conscious, preconscious, and unconscious processes. The unconscious, in this account, was not simply whatever happened to be outside awareness for a moment. It named processes that resisted easy access and could emerge indirectly in dreams, slips, or symptoms. This was an interpretive model of hidden mental life, not a map of neural tissue, and not a technical specification. Decades later, in 1923, Freud introduced a different structural model: id, ego, and superego. The id named instinctual drives seeking satisfaction. The superego named internalized prohibitions and ideals, often first shaped by parental authority. The ego had the difficult task of mediating among drives, prohibitions, and the demands of external reality. These are not little people inside the head. They are theoretical elements in Freud's attempt to describe conflict. A useful modern metaphor may compare them to competing pressures in a system, but the metaphor must not replace the theory. Freud often imagined the mind as a dynamic energy system. He wrote of pressure, conflict, discharge, resistance, and repression. Such language reflected the scientific vocabulary of his age, yet it should not be mistaken for a verified hydraulic law of the psyche. Freud's apparatus was a theoretical framework, a way to connect early experience, conflict, symptoms, and adult life. Its cultural influence has been enormous. Its claim to be a successful science of mind, however, remains the subject of serious debate. Psychoanalysis did not promise a view into hidden machinery. Its methods, free association, the interpretation of dreams, attention to slips and symptoms, asked patients to speak, remember, and make connections. The analyst listened for patterns of meaning and conflict. This is not reverse engineering in the literal sense, and it is not the decompilation of source code. It is a therapeutic and interpretive practice shaped by a particular theory of human life. Its ambition was not simply to optimize a person, but to lessen suffering by making previously unspoken conflicts more discussable. Freud's work therefore offers a challenge rather than a solution. It asks whether actions can have causes that people do not immediately recognize. It also warns us against an easy fantasy of total self-knowledge. But no historical caution should become fatalism. The fact that a person has habits, conflicts, and blind spots does not prove that agency disappears. It means that reflection, conversation, and institutions matter, because judgment is always exercised under conditions of incomplete understanding. That problem returns in a different form when we encounter contemporary machine learning. A complex model may receive data, perform many mathematical operations, and produce a classification, ranking, prediction, or recommendation. Some of those operations can be difficult for people to interpret in a way that is meaningful for a particular decision. This is one reason explainable AI has become an active field. The question is not whether a model has a secret inner life. It is whether people affected by a system can receive explanations that are useful, truthful, and appropriate to the stakes. The phrase black box can be helpful, but only if we handle it carefully. It names a practical difficulty. We may understand a system's inputs and outputs while still struggling to explain all of its internal operations in human terms. Yet opacity is not absolute. Researchers develop techniques for testing, auditing, documenting, and explaining models. And human beings themselves do not always give reliable accounts of their own choices. The useful comparison is not that a neural network has an unconscious. It is that both human and technical systems can demand forms of explanation that are difficult, partial, and consequential. The comparison becomes politically important when systems distribute attention. Social media recommendation systems help determine which posts, videos, and messages reach particular people. Their details are not always transparent, and their objectives can include engagement-related measures. But it is a mistake to say that these systems know a user's repressed desires, bypass an inner ego, or abolish free will. Their influence is real without being magical. Ranking, recommendation design, advertising, and social networks can shape what people encounter, what they linger over, and what becomes visible to others. This is why the language of surveillance capitalism must be used with care. Critics use it to describe business models built around the collection, analysis, and commercial use of behavioral data. The term is a critical diagnosis, not a neutral scientific fact that resolves every question. Still, it points toward concrete issues. Who collects data? What is inferred from it? How recommendations are ranked? Which goals are rewarded? And what opportunities people have to understand, challenge, or refuse those systems. Freud did not directly lead to cybernetics. The histories are separate. In the mid-20th century, Norbert Wiener and other thinkers formalized questions of feedback, communication, and control across animals and machines. Cybernetics gave a technical language to loops in which an action changes a system, the system returns information, and a later action responds. Its roots also reach into engineering, statistics, biology, wartime research, and earlier control mechanisms. It was not psychoanalysis translated into wires. Yet placing Freud and cybernetics side by side can still be illuminating. Both invite us to think about processes that are not immediately visible at the point of action. One tradition interpreted dreams, symptoms, and conflict. The other modeled communication, feedback, and control. Their methods, evidence, and ambitions were different, but both helped make hidden process a central modern concern. They remind us that explanation is never merely technical. It changes who can question a system, who must justify it, and who is expected to live with its consequences. That question now reaches into everyday systems. Hiring tools, benefits decisions, content ranking, medical support, insurance models, and data centers. Not all systems are equally opaque. Not all are equally harmful. Not all require the same kind of explanation. But the more a system shapes a person's opportunities, attention, health, or livelihood, the stronger the demand for accountable design. Can the system be tested? Can it be challenged? Can people understand what evidence mattered? Can institutions explain their choices without hiding behind complexity? The legacy of the black box is therefore not a lesson in surrender. Freud's work does not prove that people are programmable. Machine learning does not prove that explanation is impossible. Instead, both reveal a responsibility. When a hidden process affects a visible life, interpretation and accountability must become shared work. The aim is not to pretend that every mechanism can be made perfectly transparent. The aim is to decide what kinds of opacity are acceptable, for whom, under what safeguards, and with what right of appeal. Freud asked his readers to listen for what the self did not easily say. Cybernetics asked engineers to follow signals through a loop. Today, algorithmic systems ask us to do both: to examine outcomes, trace pathways, test claims, and remember that an explanation must answer to the people whose lives it changes. The machine is not a mystery because it is magical. The human mind is not a machine because it is complicated. But in both cases, the refusal to ask how hidden processes shape the world is itself a decision. And it is one we can still choose not to make.